Flirty Princess teased her human guard using her powers until a pregnancy scandal. For the love of Princess, please put some clothes on. John Reed pinched the bridge of his nose, deliberately averting his gaze from the violet-skinned alien princess, who was currently lounging on her ornate bed in what could generously be described as minimal sleepwear. Princess Lyria Telera, heir to the Andromeda sector's most influential noble house, merely stretched languidly, her emerald eyes twinkling with mischief. But darling John, I'm perfectly comfortable as I am, and as my personal guard, isn't my comfort your primary concern? My primary concern is your safety and maintaining proper protocol, John growled, his jaw clenching, and this is neither safe nor proper. The princess's melodic laughter filled the chamber. Oh, come now, you humans and your rigid sensibilities. On my world, this would be considered quite modest attire. We're not on your world, John countered, still steadfastly examining a particularly fascinating spot on the wall. We're on an imperial diplomatic station, surrounded by dozens of other noble houses, all of whom would love nothing more than to catch you in a compromising position. And is that what this is? Lyria purred, rising from the bed with fluid grace. A compromising position? John could feel her approaching, her natural bioluminescence casting a soft purple glow that danced at the edges of his vision. 3 months of being her personal guard had taught him that the princess delighted in making him uncomfortable. It was like a game to her, seeing how far she could push before he cracked. Your Highness, he said firmly, taking a deliberate step back, I respectfully request that you put on appropriate attire so we can proceed with today's schedule. Oh, very well, she sighed dramatically, but only because you asked so nicely. She paused, then added with a hint of steel in her voice, though I do wish you'd stop calling me Your Highness when we're alone. I've told you repeatedly to use my name. John finally risked a glance in her direction, relieved to see she'd wrapped herself in a shimmering robe. Protocol can kiss my royal posterior, she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. I didn't specifically request a human guard because I wanted another mindless drone spouting regulations at me. That caught his attention. You specifically requested me? Of course I did, Lyria said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the galaxy. After that incident on Proxima Station, where you single-handedly fought off those assassins, how could I not? Though I must admit, she added with a playful smirk, the official recordings didn't do justice to just how handsome you are. John felt heat creep up his neck. Princess Lyria, she corrected. Princess, he continued stubbornly, whatever game you're playing. Who says I'm playing a game? She stepped closer, her natural scent, something like lavender mixed with ozone, filling his nostrils. Perhaps I simply enjoy your company. Perhaps I find your stoic dedication intriguing. Before he could formulate a response, a chime from his comm unit saved him. Security alert, he said quickly, checking the display. There's been an unauthorized entry attempt in the diplomatic wing. How fortunate, Lyria said dryly. Saved by the bell, as your people say. She turned toward her dressing chamber. Give me 5 minutes to make myself presentable. Then you can go back to being my fierce protector instead of my reluctant companion. John watched her disappear behind the ornate doors, letting out a long breath. These moments were becoming more frequent and more dangerous, not because he feared for his safety, but because each time it became harder to remember why maintaining professional distance was so important. He checked his weapons and equipment while waiting, a habit ingrained from years of military service. The standard-issue plasma pistol at his hip was complemented by several non-lethal options and a monomolecular blade in his boot. Standard gear for a royal guard, though he'd made some modifications based on his experiences. Ready, Lyria emerged in full royal regalia, her violet hair elaborately styled and her golden corset gleaming. The transformation from teasing temptress to regal princess was complete, though that mischievous glint remained in her eyes. In the diplomatic wing, John reminded her, moving to take up his position slightly behind and to her left. Yes, she said, gliding toward the door. Though I do hope it's something interesting this time. These diplomatic functions can be so dreadfully boring. Boring is safe, John pointed out, and safe is my job. Your job, Lyria said over her shoulder as they entered the corridor, is whatever I say it is, and I say it's to keep me entertained as well as protected. John suppressed a groan. It was going to be one of those days. The security alert, as John soon discovered, was both more and less than it appeared. Less because there was no immediate threat to life or limb. More because the political implications made him wish it had just been another assassination attempt. Prince Karnthal of the Centaurian Empire, Lyria said, her nose wrinkling slightly as she reviewed the diplomatic notification. How unexpected. They stood in her private chambers after confirming the security breach had merely been the prince's early arrival and his guards' overzealous attempt to bypass standard security protocols. John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the timing. "You don't seem surprised," he observed carefully. Lyria's emerald eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt. "Perhaps because I'm not." She moved to her window, gazing out at the sprawling diplomatic station. The prince's visit was scheduled for next month. I may have encouraged him to arrive early. "You what?" John fought to keep his voice level. "Princess, security arrangements were already in place?" She interrupted smoothly. "I simply adjusted the timeline." "Why?" She turned to face him, and for once her usual playful demeanor was absent. "Because, my dear John, I needed to force certain issues before they became impossible to manage." A cold feeling settled in John's stomach. "What issues?" "My arranged marriage, for one." She spoke casually, but her fingers twisted nervously in her dress. "Prince Karnthal is my intended, you see. The alliance between our houses would secure peace in 3 sectors. John kept his face carefully neutral, ignoring the unexpected surge of something in his chest. "I see. And you advanced his arrival because I needed to test a theory." Her eyes locked onto his. "About human physiological responses to certain stimuli." The temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees. "Princess, for instance," she continued, taking a step closer, "did you know that humans have unique biochemical reactions to certain frequencies of bioluminescence? Particularly the frequencies my species can naturally produce?" John's mouth went dry as realization dawned. "You've been experimenting?" "Yes." Another step closer. "Carefully modulating my natural abilities to affect your emotional state." "Nothing harmful," she added quickly, seeing his expression darken. Just encouraging certain reactions, lowering inhibitions, heightening awareness." "That's..." He searched for the right word. Inappropriate seemed inadequate. Dangerous wasn't quite right either. "Necessary," she finished for him, "because I needed to know if what I was feeling was real or just a product of human pheromones." That brought him up short. "What?" Lyria's confident facade cracked slightly. "Did you think you were the only one affected? Humans produce certain scents, particularly when stressed or aroused. My species is particularly sensitive to them." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "All those times I was teasing you? I was trying to determine if my attraction was genuine or just a chemical response." John's training screamed at him to maintain professional distance, to shut this conversation down before it went somewhere dangerous. But he had to know. And I arranged for my intended to arrive early because I needed to be certain before I did this." Before he could react, she closed the distance between them. Her natural luminescence pulsed once, bright enough to leave after images dancing in his vision. When it faded, he found himself swaying slightly, his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. "What did you just..." "A concentrated burst," she said softly, "enough to temporarily bypass your conscious barriers. Don't worry, it will fade in moments, but first..." She placed a hand on his chest. "Tell me truthfully, do you feel anything for me? Anything real?" The words spilled out before he could stop them. "Everything about you feels real. Too real. It terrifies me." She smiled, sad and sweet. "Good. Because I needed you to know that before the prince arrives. Before..." A chime from the door interrupted her. The luminescence faded completely, and John's head cleared just in time to hear a cultured voice announce, "Princess Lyria?" "Prince Karnthal requests an immediate audience." Lyria stepped back, smoothing her dress. All trace of vulnerability vanished behind her royal mask. "Right on schedule," she murmured, and then louder, "Enter!" The door slid open to reveal a tall, aristocratic figure. Prince Karnthal of the Centaurian Empire cut an impressive figure, his crystalline skin catching and refracting the light. His multifaceted eyes swept the room, lingering perhaps a moment too long on John's position near Lyria. "My dear princess," he said, his voice like wind through crystal chimes. "I hope you'll forgive the early arrival. I simply couldn't wait another moment to begin our negotiations." "Of course," Lyria replied smoothly, "though I'm afraid you've caught me somewhat unprepared. Perhaps we could schedule a proper meeting for this evening. Say in the grand ballroom." The grand. The prince's features shifted in what might have been a frown. "Surely a private dinner would be more appropriate." "Oh, but I insist," Lyria said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I've arranged quite the celebration in honor of your arrival. It would be a shame to waste it." John watched the exchange with growing unease. He knew that tone. It was the same one she used when setting up one of her schemes. But what game was she playing now? The prince seemed to sense something was amiss as well, but royal protocol left him little choice. "As you wish, my dear. This evening, then." After he departed, John turned to Lyria. "What are you planning?" She was already moving to her wardrobe, pulling out gowns with focused determination. "I'm planning to create a scandal, my dear John. One that will make my marriage to the prince impossible." "Princess Lyria," she corrected absently, holding up a particularly daring gown. "What do you think? Too provocative for a diplomatic function? You can't just... Can't I?" She turned to face him, her expression fierce. "I am a princess of the house Talara. I have spent my entire life being told what I can and cannot do. But do you know what I've learned?" She stepped close again, her natural scent mixing with something deeper, more primal. "I have learned that cannot usually just means no one has been brave enough to try." John felt that familiar heat building in his chest. "This is insane." "Probably," she agreed cheerfully. "Now about this dress. You're talking about deliberately sabotaging an alliance that could prevent war. I'm talking about choosing my own destiny." She held the dress up against herself. "Besides, there are other ways to secure peace, ways that don't involve selling myself to the highest bidder." John wanted to argue further, but movement in the corridor caught his attention. More guards, palace officials. The station was coming alive with activity, all centered around the prince's arrival. "You've started something you can't control," he warned. Lyria's smile turned predatory. "Oh, my dear John, who says I want to control it?" She turned back to her wardrobe, humming softly to herself, but just before she disappeared into her dressing room, she paused. "By the way, that burst of luminescence earlier, it doesn't actually affect human biochemistry at all. I just needed an excuse to ask you that question." She winked at his thunderstruck expression and closed the door, leaving John to wonder just how many layers of games they were really playing. The grand ballroom of the diplomatic station sparkled like a field of stars, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across the gathered dignitaries. John stood at his assigned position, watching as Lyria worked the room with practiced grace. She'd chosen a gown that managed to be both perfectly appropriate and absolutely maddening, a creation of shifting violet fabric that seemed to catch every eye in the room, including his, especially his. "Your princess certainly knows how to command attention," murmured Captain Thex, head of station security. The older man's cybernetic eye whirred as it tracked movement through the crowd. "She's not my princess," John replied automatically, though his gaze never left her. "No?" Thex's organic eye crinkled with amusement. "Then why is she looking at you every 30 seconds? John started to deny it, but he'd noticed the same pattern. Every few moments, between greeting diplomats and dancing with minor nobles, Lyria's eyes would find his. Each time she'd give him that secret smile that made his pulse quicken. "It's part of her game," he said finally. "Dangerous game. You have no idea." As if hearing them, Lyria chose that moment to implement her latest torment. Her voice whispered directly into his mind, a ability of her species he'd only recently learned about. "I require your assistance, dear John, in private." He suppressed a groan. "Your Highness, you're in the middle of a diplomatic function, and I've torn my dress. Most unfortunate. I simply must change before my dance with Prince Karnthal. There are attendants for that sort of thing. None that I trust with this particular situation when her mental voice took on a sultry edge that made him grip his weapon belt tighter. Besides, I need your expert opinion on the replacement options. John glanced at Thex, who was very pointedly not smirking. Duty calls? Something like that, John muttered, already moving to follow Lyria as she made her graceful exit from the ballroom. The moment they entered her private chamber, Lyria's composed facade cracked into a mischievous grin. Finally, I thought I'd never get you alone. Your dress seems fine to me, John observed dryly. Oh, that? She waved dismissively. A minor deception. Though since you're here, she reached for the gown's fasteners. I really should try on something more provocative for my dance with the prince. Princess, help me with these clasps? She turned, presenting her back. They're quite tricky. John remained rooted to the spot. This isn't appropriate. Nothing about this situation is appropriate, she countered. That's what makes it exciting. When he still didn't move, she sighed dramatically. Fine, but you'll need to help me choose between options. She disappeared behind her dressing screen, though its translucent nature did little to preserve modesty, and John fixed his gaze firmly on the ceiling. You know, Lyria's voice drifted over, accompanied by the whisper of fabric. On my world, this would be considered quite tame. Did you know we have entire ceremonies dedicated to selecting mates based on physical compatibility? Fascinating, John managed through gritted teeth. Oh, it is. For instance, did you know that human males produce particularly intoxicating pheromones when frustrated? The temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees. Princess? I can sense them now, actually. Her voice took on that throaty quality that haunted his dreams. They're quite stimulating. This isn't safe, proper, appropriate? She stepped out from behind the screen in a gown that made her previous outfit look positively conservative. I'm beginning to think humans have too many words for no. John forced himself to maintain eye contact. We have just as many words for yes. We just understand the consequences better. Do you? She glided closer, her natural luminescence creating patterns that made him dizzy. Because from where I stand, you understand very little about what's really happening here. Then enlighten me. Gladly, she reached up, trailing fingers along his jaw. My species doesn't just choose mates for political convenience. We choose them for genetic compatibility, for chemical resonance, for She leaned closer, her breath ghosting across his ear. Potential. John caught her wrist before she could continue her exploration. And Prince Karnthal is about as genetically compatible with me as a crystal formation. She didn't pull away from his grip. If anything, she seemed to lean into it. His people reproduce through energy transfer, no physical contact required. Quite efficient, really, but ultimately, her free hand splayed across his chest. Unsatisfying. The alliance can be secured through other means. Her eyes locked with his. Unless you're not interested? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. John was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, of the way her pulse raced beneath his fingers where he still held her wrist. A chime from the door shattered the moment. Princess Lyria? Prince Karnthal's melodious voice carried through the barrier. Our dance awaits. Lyria's expression flickered with something like triumph. Perfect timing, she whispered, then called out, One moment, my princess. Yeah, I'm just finishing a wardrobe adjustment with my guard. The silence from the other side of the door spoke volumes. You're trying to make him jealous, John realized. I'm trying to make him withdraw from the arrangement of his own accord, she corrected. It's considered less of an insult that way. She stepped back, smoothing her provocative gown. Now, shall we return to the party? I believe things are about to become very interesting. As they emerged, John caught the prince's crystalline features shifting in what might have been displeasure. Lyria immediately launched into a series of effusive apologies, each one somehow managing to emphasize both her time alone with John and her complete lack of shame about it. It was, John had to admit, a masterclass in diplomatic warfare. The dance that followed was equally calculated. Lyria moved with perfect grace, but her eyes kept finding John instead of her partner. Each time they did, her luminescence would pulse in a way that made his blood heat and that the prince couldn't help but notice. She's quite good at this, Thex commented when John resumed his position. At what? Creating exactly the kind of scandal she wants while maintaining perfect deniability. the security chief's cybernetic eye word. Though I wonder if she realizes she's not the only one playing games tonight. John followed his gaze to where Prince Karnthal was speaking quietly with his advisors. The crystalline beings were clustered together, their faceted forms refracting light in complex patterns. What do you mean? Notice how the prince hasn't shown any real anger? Despite your princess's rather obvious provocations? Thex's organic eye narrowed. Either he's the most understanding royal in the galaxy, or he wants out of this arrangement as much as she does, John finished. Precisely, Thex smiled grimly. The question is why? Before John could respond, a commotion near the refreshment table drew their attention. One of the serving staff had collapsed, clutching their throat. Poison, Thex barked, already moving. Lock down the room. As chaos erupted, John caught Lyria's eye across the crowd. For once, her expression showed genuine surprise. Perhaps he thought as he moved to secure her position. She wasn't the only one trying to create a scandal tonight. The investigation into the poisoning incident had thrown the diplomatic station into chaos. Security protocols meant Lyria was confined to her quarters, with John as her sole protection. The forced proximity after weeks of escalating tension was like containing a storm in a bottle. This isn't how I planned it, Lyria admitted, pacing her chambers as the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights. Her natural luminescence cast shifting patterns on the walls, matching her agitated state. The poison was meant for me? John, who had been reviewing security footage on his datapad, looked up sharply. What? Oh, don't look so shocked, she waved dismissively. It was my own plan. A mild toxin, nothing lethal, just enough to create sympathy and delay the marriage negotiations. She dropped onto a plush chair, her expression troubled. Someone else had similar ideas, it seems, but their poison wasn't meant to be mild. You're telling me this now? I'm telling you because, she met his eyes, all pretense of playfulness gone. Because I trust you, more than I should, more than is safe. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. John set aside his datapad, giving her his full attention. Why me? Why you? She laughed, but it held an edge of desperation. Because you're different. Because you see me as more than a political asset. Because she stood, her movements carrying her closer to him. Because when you look at me like that, I forget every reason why this is a terrible idea. Princess Lyria, she corrected, now close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her violet skin. Just Lyria, please. The plea in her voice undid him. Weeks of restraint, of maintaining professional distance while she tested his limits, crumbled in the face of her vulnerability. His hand moved of its own accord, fingers brushing her cheek. Lyria, he breathed. Her luminescence flared in response, but this time he recognized it wasn't manipulation. It was pure, uncontrolled reaction. Her abilities, usually so precisely wielded, were betraying her own emotional state. I need you to understand something, she said, leaning into his touch. My species, we don't form connections lightly. When we choose a mate, it's not just physical. She struggled for words. It's biochemical, permanent. What are you saying? I'm saying that all these weeks of teasing, of testing your reactions, I wasn't just playing games. Her hand found his chest, resting over his heartbeat. I was making sure, because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Not for me. The weight of her words settled over him. And the political fallout will be catastrophic. She smiled, fierce and determined. But worth it. If you want this too. Instead of answering, John pulled her closer. The kiss that followed was inevitable. Weeks of tension finally finding a release. Her luminescence pulsed in time with their racing hearts, filling the room with patterns that would have been dizzying if either of them had been paying attention. What followed was a night of discovery, of barriers finally broken, and trust finally given completely. Their connection transcended the physical, her abilities linking them in ways that defied human understanding. In those moments, cultural differences and political consequences seemed distant and unimportant. Reality, however, had a way of reasserting itself. Hours later, as artificial dawn began to brighten the station, Lyria traced patterns on John's chest as they lay entangled in her bed. Well, she said with attempted lightness, that rather effectively burns all my bridges. Regrets? None. She propped herself up to look at him properly. Though I should warn you about something else. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. More secrets? More like biological facts. She bit her lip, an endearingly human gesture she'd picked up from him. My species is usually only fertile with extremely compatible partners. It's why arranged marriages focus on political alliances rather than reproduction. Actual genetic compatibility is incredibly rare. Usually, there have been studies about human genetic adaptability. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Apparently, your species has some unique traits that make you particularly compatible with various alien races, including mine. John felt his stomach drop. How compatible? Let's just say that if I were trying to prevent pregnancy, I should have taken precautions. She finally looked at him, her expression a mix of worry and hope. Are you angry? He should have been. It was another manipulation, another piece of information withheld until it was too late to matter. But looking at her now, vulnerable and honest, in a way she'd never been before, he couldn't summon anger. No, he said finally, but we need to talk about what happens next. Well, she said, her usual mischief returning, I believe the traditional next step is a rather spectacular scandal when my condition becomes obvious, followed by either exile or a hasty wedding, depending on how my house reacts. You've thought about this. I've thought about little else for weeks. She sat up, sheets pooling around her violet form. Though I admit, I didn't expect it to feel quite this… All right. Before John could respond, his security comm crackled to life. All personnel be advised. Prince Karnthal's delegation is demanding an immediate audience with Princess Lyria regarding a matter of grave diplomatic importance. They shared a look. Well, Lyria said brightly, shall we go face the music? As they dressed, John couldn't help but notice she seemed more amused than concerned. You're taking this rather well. Of course I am. She adjusted her gown with practiced ease. Everything's proceeding exactly as I planned. Well, almost exactly. She placed a hand on her abdomen, smiling secretly. Some things are proceeding rather more quickly than anticipated. You realize this could start a war? Or prevent one? At his questioning look, she elaborated. Did you really think I chose you at random? The human who single-handedly prevented 3 assassination attempts? Whose tactical abilities are legendary among the diplomatic corps? Whose species is rapidly becoming known as the galaxy's greatest wildcard? Understanding dawned. You're trying to force an alliance with Earth. I'm trying to secure peace through means other than loveless political marriages. She stepped close, straightening his uniform. And if I happen to find happiness in the process, well, that's just good diplomacy, isn't it? The comm crackled again, more urgently this time. Ready to face the consequences? She asked, offering her hand. John took it, marveling at how natural it felt now. With you? Always. As they left her chambers to face whatever diplomatic storm awaited, John couldn't help but think that somehow impossibly, this crazy scheme might actually work. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was turning impossible situations to their advantage. And he was nothing if not a very good human. The diplomatic chamber buzzed with barely contained chaos. News of Lyria's condition had spread through the station's gossip channels with unprecedented speed, though John suspected certain parties had deliberately accelerated its dissemination. He stood at his customary position behind Lyria's chair, watching the drama unfold with a soldier's practiced calm. Prince Karnthal's crystalline form shifted through various chromatic patterns, the equivalent of pacing in his species. This is unexpected, he said finally, his melodious voice carefully neutral. Is it? Lyria's tone carried just enough innocence to be insulting. I would have thought the signs were rather obvious. The signs of your dalliance with your human guard were indeed obvious. The prince's faceted eyes flickered toward John. The consequences, however, are unprecedented. Hardly unprecedented, came a new voice. Ambassador Cassidy of Earth stepped forward, her elegant features set in diplomatic neutrality. Human-alien compatibility has been well documented. John fought to keep his expression neutral. He hadn't expected Earth's representative to join this particular discussion or to take their side. Documentation is one thing, Prince Karnthal responded. A royal heir of House Telara carrying a human child is quite another. Perhaps, the ambassador agreed smoothly, but it does present some interesting opportunities. The room stilled. Even Lyria's constant luminescent glow dimmed slightly in surprise. Opportunities? The prince's crystalline form sparkled with what might have been interest. The Alliance has been seeking a way to establish stronger ties with Earth, Ambassador Cassady continued, as has the Centaurian Empire. This, situation could provide a unique diplomatic solution. John watched understanding dawn on Lyria's face. Her earlier schemes suddenly seemed almost simplistic compared to what was unfolding. You knew, he whispered through their mental link, another gift of their night together. You knew Earth would intervene. I suspected, she replied silently. Hoped, but this is better than I imagined. The prince was speaking again. You suggest a three-way alliance? Using this scandal as justification? I suggest, the ambassador corrected, that we acknowledge the obvious. The old ways of securing peace through arranged marriages are becoming obsolete. Humanity's emergence has changed the galactic landscape. We offer something unique. Genetic compatibility with multiple species. Yes, but more importantly, adaptability, innovation, a fresh perspective on ancient problems. Lyria's hand found John's, hidden from view beneath the table. Her touch carried emotions through their link. Hope, triumph, and something deeper that made his heart race. There is precedent, Prince Karnthal said slowly. My own house has been seeking alternatives to the traditional alliance structure. His crystalline form shifted to a deep blue, a color John had never seen him display before. In fact, I have a confession of my own. The room tensed. The assassination attempt, the prince continued. It was orchestrated by my house, not to harm anyone, he added quickly as John's hand moved to his weapon, but to provide justification for withdrawing from our arrangement without losing face. Lyria's laughter, rich and genuine, broke the tension. You too? And here I thought I was being original with my poisoning scheme. The prince's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. It seems we were both seeking escape from our obligations. For similar reasons, I suspect. Lyria's eyes sparkled with mischief. Would these reasons happen to involve a certain crystalline duchess who's been serving as your cultural attaché? The prince's colors shifted rapidly, the equivalent of a blush. Your information networks are impressive, princess. As are your acting skills, my prince. I almost believed you were genuinely offended by my behavior. Yes, well, he straightened, his form settling into more formal patterns. Perhaps we can assist each other in achieving our mutual goals. Ambassador Cassady stepped forward again. Earth would be happy to facilitate such an arrangement. A public declaration of support for Princess Lyria's choice, combined with a new three-way trade and defense agreement, would give everyone what they want while maintaining face, Lyria finished. Brilliant. John felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, but years of military service had taught him to look for the catch. It seems too easy. Oh, it won't be easy, Lyria assured him through their link. My house will be furious. There will be challenges, political maneuvering, probably a few more actual assassination attempts. Her mental voice carried a note of excitement that should have worried him more than it did. But we'll handle those together. Together, he agreed, squeezing her hand. The next few hours were a blur of diplomatic negotiations, with terms and conditions flying faster than John could track. But certain key points emerged. Earth would gain significant trade concessions in military cooperation agreements. The Centaurian Empire would save face while securing their own preferred alliances. And Lyria's house would gain unprecedented access to human genetic diversity, something apparently highly valued in their culture. As for Lyria and John, you realize this makes you something of a diplomatic pioneer, Ambassador Cassady told him during a brief recess. The first human to officially marry into one of the major houses. Marry? John hadn't quite processed that part yet. Of course, Lyria chimed in, appearing at his side. Unless you prefer to be known as my concubine? It's quite a respectable position in my culture, actually, though the uniform is rather revealing. I'll take marriage, thanks, he said quickly, earning laughs from both women. As the day wore on, John found himself increasingly amazed at how a potential diplomatic disaster was being transformed into a triumph of an interspecies cooperation. Though watching Lyria work, her political acumen matched only by her obvious delight in the chaos she'd created, He wondered if this hadn't been her plan all along. Not entirely, she admitted later, when they were finally alone. I knew involving a human would force changes to the traditional systems. I hoped it would lead to better solutions for peace than arranged marriages, huh? But this... She placed his hand on her abdomen, where their child grew. This I wanted purely for myself. Her luminescence pulsed with emotion, and John felt the echo of her feelings through their link. Love, hope, and a fierce joy that took his breath away. No regrets? He asked. Only that I didn't start teasing you sooner, she replied with a wicked grin. Think of all the diplomatic incidents we could have caused. John groaned, but pulled her closer. I think you've caused quite enough incidents for one lifetime. Oh, darling, she purred, her eyes glowing with familiar mischief. I'm just getting started. 6 months after what diplomatic circles had dubbed the incident, John stood before a mirror in the royal palace of House Talara, adjusting the ceremonial armor that marked his new status. The wedding ceremony would blend Earth military traditions with Talaran royal customs, a first of its kind, like so much about their union. Nervous? Captain Thex appeared in the reflection, his cybernetic eye whirring as it took in John's appearance. Terrified, John admitted with a laugh. Though not about the ceremony. Ah, yes, the impending fatherhood. Thex smiled knowingly. The first human Talaran child in recorded history. The geneticists are beside themselves with excitement. So I've noticed. John had lost count of the medical examinations and tests they'd endured. Though Lyria, true to form, had turned each one into an opportunity for teasing, insisting he hold her hand through every procedure, demanding he massage away her stress afterward. Their mental link had only grown stronger with her pregnancy, allowing him to share in every moment of joy, discomfort, and wonder. The first time they'd felt their child's consciousness brush against theirs, Lyria's luminescence had lit up the entire medical wing. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. It's time, Thex announced. The great hall of House Talara sparkled with the combined light of 1,000 crystalline decorations, a gift from the Centaurian Empire, and the natural bioluminescence of the assembled Talaran nobility. Earth's delegation stood out in their crisp military dress, while various alien races added their own unique colors to the gathering. Prince Karnthal, now officially bonded to his crystalline duchess, nodded approvingly as John took his position. You've started quite the trend, you know, he commented in his musical tones. 3 more human-alien noble marriages are already in negotiations. Lyria will be insufferable when she hears that, John replied. She already claims credit for revolutionizing galactic diplomacy. Is she wrong? Before John could respond, the hall's lighting dimmed. A soft glow announced Lyria's arrival, and John's breath caught in his throat. She was radiant. Her pregnancy had enhanced her natural luminescence, making her seem to float as she moved down the aisle. Her gown, a masterwork of Talaran design, shifted and flowed like liquid starlight. But it was her expression that captured him. That same mixture of mischief and love that had first broken through his professional barriers. You're staring, she whispered through their link as she reached him. You're beautiful, he replied simply. The ceremony itself was a blur of traditions. They spoke vows in 3 languages, sealed their union with both Earth and Talaran customs, and were officially recognized by representatives of a dozen worlds. But for John, the most meaningful moment came during the traditional Talaran binding ritual. As they stood before the assembled guests, Lyria's luminescence enveloped them both. Through their link, she shared memories of their journey. Her first impression of him, admiration mixed with immediate attraction, her deliberate campaign of teasing, which had affected her almost as much as him, and the moment she'd realized she was carrying their child, joy so intense it had nearly overwhelmed their link. In return, he shared his own memories, his struggle to maintain professionalism, his growing appreciation for her brilliant mind, as well as her beauty, and the moment he'd realized he'd fall on his sword for her without hesitation. I love you, they thought simultaneously, causing several Talaran guests to gasp at the visible pulse of light that accompanied the shared emotion. The celebration that followed was appropriately epic, with diplomatic achievements being toasted alongside their personal happiness. Ambassador Cassidy had orchestrated a series of trade agreements that would reshape the political landscape, using their union as a template for new forms of interstellar cooperation. "You've changed everything," the ambassador told them during a quiet moment. "Humanity needed a way to prove its worth to the galactic community. What better way than through love? And genetic compatibility," Lyria added impishly, one hand resting on her growing belly. Later, as the celebration wound down, they escaped to their private chambers, the same ones where their relationship had first crossed the line from professional to personal. "Having regrets, what?" Lyria asked, though her teasing tone and the emotions flowing through their link suggested she already knew the answer. "Only about how long it took me to realize what you were really up to with all that teasing," John replied, pulling her close. "Oh? And what was I really up to? Creating the biggest diplomatic scandal in recent history, revolutionizing interstellar relations, finding an excuse to get me to give you foot massages." She laughed, the sound like music. "All true, though you forgot the most important part, which is..." Her luminescence pulsed with emotion as she guided his hand to where their child grew. "Finding someone who could keep up with me in every way." Through their link, he felt the depth of her love, her joy in their shared future, and her continued delight in finding new ways to make him blush, even now. "You're still going to tease me mercilessly, aren't you?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course, my love." Her eyes sparkled with familiar mischief. "It's tradition now. Besides," she added, sending him a mental image that made him flush scarlet, "I have so many new ideas to try." "Lyria." "That's Princess Lyria to you," she corrected with mock severity. "Or wife. I'm flexible." As she demonstrated that flexibility by pulling him into a kiss, John reflected that some diplomatic incidents had very satisfying conclusions indeed. Their child kicked, sending a pulse of happiness through their link, and Lyria's luminescence brightened in response. In that moment, surrounded by her light and love, John knew that every protocol he'd broken, every rule he'd bent, had led him exactly where he was meant to be. "Together," Lyria whispered, answering his thoughts. "Together," he agreed, holding his family close as the stars wheeled overhead, promising a future brighter than either of them had imagined.